Now let's take a look at scenes and layers. And first, I guess I said that in the wrong order, we're going to take a look at layers and how we can kind of phase out or put different phases of a building on different layers. So let's just make a few assumptions here about our building. And your building doesn't have to look exactly like mine. But just as long as you have something a little bit noticeably different, like a base and then a middle point, and then we're going to add like a tower on top. So what I would do is let's say I'm just going to kind of shrink that down and get rid of that part. So we're going to say that this first portion is phase 1. So we'll select and then I need to make sure I select all of that. I can triple click and then right click and make it a group. So that's phase 1. Now phase 2, I'm going to draw right on top of there, and then we're going to pull that up, whatever looks right on your screen, and use our selection tool and triple click and make that a group. So that's going to be our phase 2. Now let's make one more. We'll use our rectangle tool, draw a rectangle on there and pull that up, and this is going to be phase 3. Okay, so now I can use my selection tool, triple click, right click on my selection, and choose make group. So not the most attractive design, but it does illustrate very clearly 3 different phases. So we've called these our phases, but SketchUp doesn't really know anything about these chunks or groups of geometry other than that they're groups. So what we can do is add some layers. I'm going to close my shadow settings for now and go to Window, Layers. Layers in SketchUp only control visibility. So whether or not a layer is turned on or off is whether or not it is visible or not. So we can add layers by clicking on the plus sign. So I'm going to call this one phase 1 and make another layer called phase 2, and then let's put on one more layer called phase 3. So we have phases 1, 2, and 3. Now we've added these layers, but we still have not assigned a layer to our different pieces. If I right click on any one of these and choose Entity Info, you can see that this is a solid group. This top one that I have selected is a solid group, and its layer, that should probably be on phase 3. Alright, and then the bottom one, this guy should be on phase 2, and then I'll select the middle, the bottom one, I'm sorry, is on phase 1, the middle piece is on phase 2. Alright, so now you can see that we can control the visibility of each one of these phases by going phase 1, 2, and 3. So phase 1 is first, phase 2 is second, and phase 3 is last. Okay, so now we have phase 1, 2, and 3, but here's the thing, is that layers can be attached to scenes. So oftentimes what you want to do is create a presentation or maybe even an animation where we can show the different phases of this building. So let's go to Window, Scenes, and open up our Scenes dialog box. And then I also kind of want to detach that from my other window here because I don't have a lot of screen space. Okay, so that's fine. We'll move that over there, dock those together, and so basically what we're going to do is create 3 scenes, and each one of these scenes is going to represent our phase. So on our first scene, we'll add it, and let's call this scene phase 1. Now on phase 1, we really don't want phases 2 or 3 turned on. Now take a look at scenes. Scenes are a little bit tricky. A scene, it's typically you would think of it just as a camera view. But a scene in SketchUp contains the camera location, or the camera view. It contains whether or not geometry is hidden. It contains whether or not layers are visible. They're either turned on or turned off. Our active section planes, style and fog, shadow settings, and axes locations. So all these different properties can be associated with a scene. 99% of the time, if you're creating a scene, you want to have all of these properties checked on. Now, if I click on phase 1, it's going to take me back to that original layer state when I created this scene. So if I want on my phase 1 scene, which there's phase 1 here in my scenes dialog, and then it's also represented up here on my scene tab. What I can do is I can turn off phases 2 and 3, but now I need to tell this scene that I want you to save the layers the way they are. So I'm going to highlight it and click on update. And the only property that I want to update is my visible layers, because that's the only thing I really changed there. So I'll click on update. Keep in mind, 99% of the time, you're never going to go back here and touch these checkboxes. So it's a little confusing because there's the update dialog, which looks very similar to the properties to save. So again, 99% of the time, you're never going to touch these. They're almost always going to all be checked on. If you want to make sure that you've saved something or update a scene, you'll go to your Update Scenes button. Okay, so now we need to have another phase, phase 2 scene. So we'll click on the plus sign, and let's call this one phase 2, and hit enter to lock that in. Now on phase 2, I just want to keep on phase 1 and phase 2. So now I need to click on my Update Scenes button, and we're just going to update our visible layers. So now I can go from phase 1 to phase 2. So you can see how those scene tabs are toggling my layers on and off. Let's make one more scene. Add a scene and call this one phase 3. Hit enter to lock that in. Now on phase 3, we're just going to turn on phase 3, and we want to make sure that we update that scene, and we want to update our visible layers. Alright, so now we have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Now, what if we want, at the same time that these scenes are, or I'm sorry, at the same time that these phases are building up on each other, we want to be orbiting around this model? Well, that's the camera location. So we'll go to phase 1, is going to start here, and then we're going to orbit just, a little bit around the way, and we need to tell phase 2 to save this camera location. So I'll highlight phase 2 and click on update, and the only property that we're going to update is our camera location. So now I can orbit around again, and phase 3 we're going to update, and the only property we want to update is our camera location. So now I can go from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. So we can control the speed at which this animation happens as well. We can go to Window, Model Info, and on the Animation tab, the more seconds you put between the scene transitions, or as the scene transitions, the slower it's going to move, and almost the smoother it's going to move. So maybe like 5 seconds here would be good. And then as far as a scene delay, I typically just leave that to 0. I don't want it to stop at each scene and hold on there. So that's all set up. I can close that and close this. So now I'm going to right click on my scene tab and choose play animation. And so here you can see it's cycling back to phase 1, and then it's going to bounce right into phase 2, and then same thing for phase 3. and then that's going to also cycle back around. So you can see how we can attach, I'm going to stop that animation, we can attach the layers to the scenes. Now, scenes do hold a number of different properties here. As I mentioned, the hidden geometry, camera location, visible layers, active section planes, style and fog, and shadow settings. So that's another cool one, is we can get our shadows to animate at the same time. So we can have all this stuff kind of animating, and it makes for some pretty cool presentations. So what we'll do then is go to Window, Shadows. Open up our shadow settings. Now on phase 1, I'm going to click on that phase or on that scene tab so that I animate to there, and now everything on my screen looks the way that it looks during phase 1. So now I'm going to turn on my shadows, and let's set these for, let's just say like 7 something a.m. That looks pretty good. Now if I want phase 1 to hold on to this shadow setting, I need to tell it. I need to come down here into my scenes dialog box and update phase 1. And I need to tell it, really the only thing I want you to remember this time around, because the only thing I'm changing or working on right now are my shadow settings. So I'll leave the shadow settings checked on and choose update. Now let's go to phase 2. Notice that on phase 2 the shadow settings turned off. So we need to turn the shadows on, and let's set that like somewhere around noon. Okay, so we've gone to our phase 2 scene tab, modified our shadow settings. What happens if I click on phase 2? It's just going to go back there. It's going to run turn the shadows off and go back to whatever the default settings were when I created this scene. So turn our shadows on, slide this over to noon, and then we need to tell phase 2 update, and the only property we want to update are the shadow settings. Choose update. Now phase 3, we'll come over here. Again, we need to turn our shadows on, and let's keep this late in the day, like 6 o'clock. Okay, now again we need to tell phase 3 update, and the only property that we want to update is our shadow settings. We'll update that. Now when I right click on here and choose play animation, which hopefully everything's running fast enough to do that, you'll see the shadows. So here's phase 1, and then phase 2, and then phase 3. So you're not actually seeing the shadows because my computer's dragging a little bit. I'm guessing yours might too. The shadows are pretty heavy, but if we go to File and choose Export Animation, so File, Export Animation, we can create an animation file where we can actually see all of this playing very clearly, and we don't have to rely on the computer to calculate all that for us. We just have a nice clean video file. So let's just keep this at our frame rate at 10, and we're not going to loop back. I like to do widescreen, and I'm going to leave these settings pretty low because I want this to export real quick. You might consider setting this to like a 1080 or HD video settings, or set these to like 30 frames per second. But for this export, I want to keep this nice and quick. So we'll export this, and you can see that's going to take not too much time at all. So we'll let that crank here. So while that's working here, very, very important, properties to save within the scenes dialog box. You never really need to touch these, and 99% of the time all of these need to be checked on for any scene you're creating. Now if you want to apply changes to a scene, you need to click on the update button, and then only update the properties that you've worked on. Alright, so now our animation comes out here. Oh, let's see. So I need to open up my temp folder and look for Denver. And so Denver AVI. Okay, so there's my animation coming through, and so you can see it's very small, but we have those shadows. You can see them as it's growing. Those shadows are animating as well. So you can create some really compelling presentations by using this technique, and this is a great way to phase out a building. One other tip about presentation, I'll close that guy down. Don't hesitate to use a post-processing tool like Windows Movie Maker is free, or if you have access to like Adobe Premiere, and you can just with a little bit of extra effort in those programs, you can really clean things up and kind of patch them together using the different transitions. So that's definitely a good idea, is to use a post-processing tool such as Adobe Premiere or Windows Movie Maker, iMovie, whatever it may be. Really put that finishing touch on your presentation.